We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusovsky, aka Will Clue, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. Special episode today. Joined by the guys from Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks podcast. So people way more superior than me in the podcasting world. But glad to have you here, guys. You want to each get 20, 30 seconds to tell us who you are and why we care?
Yeah, sure. I'm George K from the vendor side. Usually work with startups, go-to-market advisory, and my co-host.
Hello, I'm George A. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer, like you hear every week. So I'm currently the CISO for the parent company for Ashley Madison. I'm also the field CISO for a technology law firm. So I'm usually out there working 12-hour days on both sides of the aisle.
That's awesome. And that's what I also have been on both sides of the aisle too, like spend a little time in the retail world before I got into consulting and managed security services. And so this should be fun because I think it's nice for those who haven't sat on both sides to kind of get some perspective. So, the main thing here we're talking is buying and selling security in general. And I'll let either you decide who wants to go first on the buying or selling side. But looking specifically, like if I think of like, what's the number one thing you think is most valuable from your perspective on either buying or the selling that it makes the difference?
Cool. I'll start with the selling because George can chime in on like the buying side better than I can. So I used to ask the typical question of startups, which is, oh, well, what does your solution address? They almost always take that to mean the technical problem, right? So what threat or what risk, that's what they're going to couch it in. Starting late last year, I started asking them, what business risk do you address? To which I usually got crickets because they just weren't used to that framing. And I had learned, from managing the community at the CISO Society, which is the day job, and also talking to George, like, look, if you can't put it in those terms, the CISO can sign an SOW, but they do not sign the check. And they got to go get that permission from somebody, and they have to justify it. And they can't use your nerd speak to justify it. Because if you say like, oh, we make your firewall more effective, they say that to a CIO or a CFO, they're going to be like, didn't we pay for the firewall last year? Like, so asking and thinking now about business risk, I think, is of paramount importance versus you can save it for the demo call to get into the weeds about the threat and the risk, but like you got to be able to talk about the business first.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the biggest thing, especially if we're talking about how are you going to solve my problem as a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, what I need to understand is, one, you're an authentic individual who I can trust at face value on your word. And two, do you actually understand my problem statement? Have you shown that you've done some level of research? Are you listening to what I'm saying? It's honestly really, really basic schoolyard kind of stuff. But
and yet
so much. And yet.
But really, that's all you have to do to sell correctly. I mean, like, I saw recently another podcast that put out an episode questioning like whether CISOs should be dictating how sellers be interacting with them, right? And in my mind, I look at this like, yes, we should be, because at the end of the day, we might not be signing the checks, but we're the ones authorizing the purchase. So whatever you have to do to convince us to purchase that, you might want to listen to what we want and how we want it delivered. So again, going back to the basics, authentic conversation, authentic opening, be there to listen more than to talk, and actually try to identify and solve my problem. Because if you aren't doing that, I don't care about your fancy AI-enabled feature.
Yeah,
right?
And I would say like whether you're on the buying and selling side, right? In Salesforce and in the sales process, there is always this idea of like, who is the champion, right? Who is fighting for you on the inside? But I think people have taken that to mean who is pushing the deal forward for you, not who is putting their ass on the line for you, which is really what it is. So like if you make George look like an asshole,
Yeah.
like, he can't, why would he do that? Like that's, I had posted about this. It's, you're asking for them to use their political and social capital within the company. So that is very precious, and it is finite, and it can be lost. And so that's why it's got to be a credible sale, right? That's why that trust matters.
That's 100. Like when I do sales enablement, I tell the sellers that exact thing. I'm like, get to know that champion, that person you're selling to, CISO, director, whoever it is, and understand what their KPIs and metrics are. Like, what are their goals? What do they want to accomplish? Like, to the other George's point, like what's your mission? And then address that. Like, that's how you have to put that together. And it's funny too. You mentioned the startups when they come, they talk about the blinky lights. I get a lot of those too. I love when startups come to me and they want me to poke holes in the product. That's super exciting. And almost all the time, I'm like, when I will ask the same question: what's the business problem you solve, right? And do you understand the context of that? Like, are you making life easier for one analyst, or are you making life easier for the whole company? Because if you're not helping the whole company, they don't care. And then the other side of that, like, we're go-to-market nerds. I'm like, send me your one pager, your one thing, and most of the time, what is it? It's all wrong. It's blinky lights, faster, better. I'm like, nope. Tell me why.
MTTR, MTTD.
Yeah. Like, how is the CISO going to be happier because of it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem too, man, is that we understand, that these sellers have quotas and you guys have your deadlines to meet, and sometimes your job might be on the line, or you might perceive that it's on the line. So there's a pressure that comes with that. But George speaks to a really good point. I mean, as a CISO, I am really only ever going to make so many asks to my board, to my CEO, to my CIO about a net new purchase, especially if it's a net new problem statement. Because especially when talking to my CIO, like, he knows what the problems are. Trust me. Like, we coordinate on this thing every single day, every single week. And while your tool or your product might be really cool, really innovative, all the VCs back you, it's super awesome. But if like that the solution is looking for a problem, you are not going to find, unless you are one of the rare super cash rich CISOs that have like $180 million to run your budget. George knows what I'm talking about. Most of us are pretty budgetarily constrained, and oftentimes, especially post interest rate era, we're all in like this keep the lights on mode. A lot of us are coming out of like 1 or 2 or 3 rounds of cuts and layoffs. It's just not the mood. It's not the environment. And I think that's why, George and I do a lot of shows together. And I take such a major issue with all these point solutions that have been coming up that are just waiting to be acquired. And that's the game by the founders, because it's a waste of my time to try to go to bat for you to purchase your product if I don't even know you're going to be around next year.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I would say 2 things. So to your point, Will, about sales enablement, the best thing a sales team can do in terms of discipline is learn to qualify out fast. Right. So like, let's say you get someone's attention, but they're like, look, man, I already purchased, sort of locked up for the year, or like, our environment doesn't really have this need right now because we have it covered with this thing. Like, great. You put that person on the back burner and you maintain that relationship because you're not a dick, but like, don't keep pushing it. Like, I've seen teams so much energy and time and cycles on chasing something that is just has a very low likelihood, but they're kind of enamored with the logo, or they, and so it's like, okay, it's cool, but move on. The other thing for founders is, you are in the trenches, you're building the thing, you love your baby. That's why you tend to be able to only tell the story from the technical problem. Like, you're super psyched about the elegant solution you have found for this problem. Maybe you're a former practitioner and you're like, we couldn't find a solution to this, so we built it, and I'm super excited about that. Okay, great. Now you've got a couple of design partners. Maybe you sign a few customers, they convert into customers. The best thing you can do at that point is to get them to tell you what their product does and use their language. Stop speaking your language and learn the one, because we've said this at RSA. What you're seeing at the big conferences, when you can laugh at the jargon and the buzzwords, what you're seeing is this problem. You are seeing everyone speaking in their language and not the language of the buyers. So you might come out there and say like, oh, we are a pre-zero trust AI enabled whatever the hell. Let's say George stops at your booth and actually finds interest in it. He's not going to go say that when he runs into his friend in the expo hall or on the escalator. Somebody's going to say like, did you see anything cool? And he's like, yeah, I did see this thing. It feels like it's going to help us solve this problem, or it's going to help us like automate some of our, I don't know, our remediation processes. But that's the language that he's going to use. So the sooner you can talk in the language of your customer, because they need to carry your message. They're not going to carry your jargon. That shit is too heavy. They're just not going to do it. It's too much to remember. Anyway, I can get off that soapbox.
No, I love it. They're not going to carry your jargon. I think I'm going to use, like, I know a few CEOs of companies that and they have like, the really cool technical long-term, they made up their own basically.
Yes. Everyone wants to make up a category.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, they're smart enough to be like, well, this helps you see everything, or this helps you find all the bad stuff. Like, just keep it simple. And I when I'm consulting for, again, go to market stuff and the sales and all that, is like, that's how you need to present yourself in client stories, like tell, and I don't like, I'm interested in you guys, if you've seen this, most people who've, created a product, at least from a startup perspective, they have this idea that it's going to be this thing. And then as soon as the client starts using it, they use it in a whole different direction, and then they really define what the product's like. So even though that, like, I don't know if you guys see that same kind of thing happening.
100%. Yeah. Because the product designers, the product founders, product solves problem. That's how the equation usually runs for them. But I think most cybersecurity practitioners, the meat of their job is in the process. So when they adopt the product, like, the question is this going to like 3x my process? I saw this amazing data obfuscation tool, right? It like scrambled the hell out of everything. It was going to make ransomware impossible. Ain't no one going to buy it, because the kludgy uptake is definitely going to 3x like everyone's with data labeling and all this, like adding files to this thing. And like, you hadn't studied what your customers use products for and how they operate in their day-to-day. So this is all to say, I think product leaders think of problems. Great. Yes, you need to think of a problem to solve it, but you must evolve from the problem to the process, because that's where you run into the bottleneck made of human meat.
Yeah, I think part of the problem too is you don't, and I don't know if it's the case where there's a lack of beta testing, like in pre-release, like especially like pre-prod release. Like, if your UX is absolutely terrible and you are already busy, fucking security. Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, go for it.
I already have.
Sorry. If you already asked a fucking busy security team, hey, take our super fucking complicated, like, jiggity product that you have to use like an obscure query language for to get any kind of results from. It's like, dude, this is going to be shelfware, man. It's going to be a waste of budget. And then I'm going to get chewed out at budget time, because then, my CIO or my CFO is going to be like, hey, what's this line item here? How come it costs $30,000, $40,000, $50,000? You guys don't even use it. I've never seen one report from it. What is this thing? Like, those are the kind of conversations that CISOs and buyers typically want to avoid. And I don't think, like, I wish more founders had more experience being buyers. Because I think there would be a lot more empathy and understanding to, as George is talking about, the process by which they're trying to inject their solution into. Because you have these founders who, and like, bless them. They're young, they're relatively like new in their careers, some of them, or they had never really been in that executive buyer role. They're like, I have an idea. It's the best idea ever. I built the thing. It's the shiniest thing ever. This is going to be awesome. Give me my millions. I'm the next George Kurtz, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, if they don't actually have any understanding of that business process from a human experiential level, they might not even make go to market, dude. And
Yeah.
I wish more founders understood that.
You know, it's funny. As
Yeah,
soon as you
I
said
would
that, I
say
started
like
thinking about like the founders that I know that have really good products and I think are going to do well. And they were former CISOs, former CIOs. They've, you know, been through it all. George, go ahead. You're saying something?
Yeah, I was going to give a shout out to two past guests. Meryl Vernon was on our show, and she said she has like this one qualifying question for tooling, which was like, does it export to XML? And, you know, if they said no, it was basically like a non-starter, because then it was going to require work on their team's part to get the shit out of this tool into that one. It's not going to work. And like, it doesn't matter how shiny and cool and dark mode your dashboards are. Like if you can't, that's process, right?
Right.
And then the other one is Ross Haliuk has been writing a lot
Yeah.
about innovations in UI UX, and 100%. There's a lot of cultural capital around software engineers, right? Who can engineer the coolest things. Cool. Your code is awesome. It does incredible things. But if your UX looks like, you know, 2005, like I hate it in this tool, it's a lot of clicks, it's just not going to get that uptake, right? And so I think we need to start elevating product designers and UIX because what their work is usually like the anthropology of the customer. They usually want to like shadow your process and kind of understand that. That is super, super important in terms of like, especially if you're building tooling like everyone is now, that needs to integrate with something else, because I don't know who's operating under the delusion that security teams are like, I would like one more thing to look at.
Yeah, I need another screen, please. No, and it's funny because I think like you both kind of mentioned this, and this is the model, at least from the product standpoint, like get it like 80% of the way there, throw it at your customers, worry about UI UX later, right? And I have the same thing. Like, see, I'm like, if it's not intuitive, like I'm not a genius, but I'm a pretty smart guy. I've been around the block. If I can't figure out how to use your GRC tool just by clicking around in it, it's probably too complicated. Right?
Or it's got like a drop-down menu that you have to keep scrolling.
Yeah, like
to get to the thing, to whatever. Yeah, no, thank you.
Let me shift gears because we talked a lot about product, and so I want to talk a little on the services side too, from a selling perspective. Kind of going back to like what I always say and kind of try to impart on the people I work with is the CISO doesn't usually want to talk to your product. Like if you sell a product, they don't want to talk to you once a year, and all they're going to do is do the renewal, right? And from a services standpoint, you can't, if all you're doing is reselling product, or you're only showing up to sell the services once a year, you're not going to get time. And I believe they have to have an actual partnership. So George, I'm curious from you, from the CISO side, like I know I have CISOs that I've worked with that I'll go sit on their budget meetings and things like that, but that's not all the time, right? Those are few and far between. But yeah, what do you think in that lines of like you said, be a human, but like, do you really value those partnerships with the salespeople or even with the organization that's helping you out in that case? Or is it transactional for you all the time?
No. I mean, it's my whole approach is all about like building very close partnerships with my sellers, because as George mentioned earlier, like I have to be their champion in my organization to quarterback that purchase. So we kind of have to be close on some level. You know, and if it's not the seller itself, like maybe I really like the solution engineer they bring on, cool. But someone on your team has to be able to speak my language, and we got to get along on like a human level, because we need that chemistry to ride the waves through the challenges and some of the pushback we might get, or if there are delays, or like it's a business, so shit might happen. We might have like, you know, boom, this fucking release went like shit. Now we've dropped revenue. We've lost fucking 13% over the last month, blah, blah, blah. I can't make that purchase now. We might have gone through a 6-month sales cycle to get everyone on board with it, but because we had a revenue issue, we're on delay, right? If it's just transactional, that immediately creates just like a world of bitterness between like the vendor organization and myself or us or whatever. That's no good. If it's humans doing business with humans, I can turn to you with transparency and be like, hey, we've had some revenue issues in the last few weeks. I have to delay this. I don't know how long it's going to be, but know that I still want you guys, but we got to hold on. Can you tell your director? Can you tell your CRO that, like, hey, we're just going through some issues right now. Put us on ice, but it might be like next quarter. Like, it's like anything else, because I compare a lot of the business and sales relationship to dating, and a lot of the same methodology to being a new dating partner that's good is the same thing of being a good seller, right? Like, don't be too creepy, don't be too much, don't be constantly like texting and messaging and calling. Listen to your partner when they're telling you, hey, I might not be available at this time, I need a bit more time, or hey, this isn't really a good light. Like, just to go with this example a bit, I'm going into exams, I'm going to be busy for the next month, can I talk to you in a month? Right? They're not telling you to piss off. They're telling you, I need to focus on this problem right now, and then I can get back to you. Just like back then, if you are a reasonable person and you're listening to them and you're cool, it'll be okay. You'll still get your sale. It just might be a little bit more kick down the road. But if you are over aggressive and all you care about is meeting that quota, then the priority from your perspective as a seller, and this is my interpretation, it's only like your own interests are your priority, not servicing me, not trying to help me solve my problem. And if I feel that, there's no relationship, dude.
Yeah. And I would say that he's talking about like this relationship resilience, which also happens after you sign. Like if it's like, we've gone through this journey together, now I'm going to hand you over to the implementation folks, I will see you next year.
Yeah,
when it's time for the renewal, right? Because if you feel like abandoned to the tooling and you've gone on this journey, like that is a serious problem. That's like probably it's a not insignificant part of churn, right? Is like people just don't feel like customer success or whatever is with them. Sure, yes, there's somebody who's going to check in. I understand your account rep can't be that person, but they got to put in some work, right? QBRs or whatever, and not just show up for that, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned customer success. They're one of the areas where I'm always very like, most of the time it's wrong. I've seen it implemented wrong because
mostly it's usually someone just tasked with collecting payment.
Yeah, or like, hey, do you want to upgrade? Hey, sure, we're gonna have QBRs, but we're gonna get the person from the SOC, the attack person's gonna come here and give you everything, and then maybe
best customer success is just like the friend of the org, and they're
exactly
the ones who are going to come back and be like, they're going to come back and be like, they're going to chase down the support tickets. Like, hey, have we closed that yet? Because they have to be the champion in reverse for the other side too.
I do like to hold a lot of onus on the account teams too. Like that to me is, again, to George's point, like you have to have, like, you really should be, maybe don't have to be friends necessarily, but like you should have a relationship with that person and talk to them regularly, and not just, pitch it off to customer success or the SOC or whoever and expect that that's going to, continue to grow and move on to your next quota.
And I think the other part of what George was saying is, if it does get put on ice, right, and he's got the revenue problem in this hypothetical scenario, the sales team has to have a culture where that's okay. Well, so one, I think every seller knows you can't have all your eggs in one basket, right? Because shit happens and people delay, and you can't have like put all of your energy into 3 accounts and one of them delays and you miss. Fine. But you also I haven't decided like what the metric needs to be in Salesforce, because usually you're using a forecasting tool, and like, say you move it to 80 and then you move it back to 60, you're actually not saying the likelihood has reduced of closing. What you're trying to say is it's just not there yet. Like, you need like a metric that measures the health of the relationship, not just the health of the deal. And then you need a sales culture that says, like a CRO or someone who's going to like hear that from the A and be like, that's okay. Like it's a bummer that we might not hit the number, but let's make sure we really follow up next quarter and then tell me what else you're working on. But it can't be like, let me hammer that person because of this externality that they can't control, because that creates the cultures that George is afraid of. That creates a culture where I just got to like hound you because, oh my God, like,
Quota.
you know, yeah.
It also would prevent an issue that like I encountered, and George and I will probably do something with it at some point. Actually, no, we did with Chris. Never mind. So I had to deal with a situation earlier in the year where like I had to end a long-standing supplier relationship because we decided to go a different direction. And a big motivating factor for that was we were just not getting good service provisioning. Like we were not getting service support. It was slow or like very delayed. And we just weren't getting the attention that we wanted because this is a really critical tool for us. And, you know, after 7 years, and if that's where the relationship is, it doesn't feel quite good anymore. You have all these other providers who are offering compelling technology who actually do want to pay attention to you. I made the call, be like, cool, well, we're going to have to walk away from you guys. And, you know, eventually, like this company, which did go through a lot of changes, they went through an acquisition, blah, blah, blah. We got a new team, a new account team who are awesome, legit. New sales guy, super awesome guy. I would love to do business with him. It's a small industry, man. Maybe down the road I will get that chance, but for now it just wasn't going to work. When I decided to end this relationship, not in a typical CISO way where I just like either ghost you or send you an email and fuck off. Like I was like, no, like I'm gonna go on call with you because we had a scheduled call. I told the rest of my team don't show up for it. I'm gonna handle it solo. And I told him straight up, I'm going to have to end this relationship. We're not going to renew. Here's why. And this is kind of like where I'm trying to do things as a CISO with a more kind of human mindset. So I told my guys, like, prep some feedback. I want to give them some feedback as to like what we liked about the relationship with them, where there are points for improvement. Because I know that, you know, and working with George every week, sellers oftentimes don't get any feedback when a client relationship sours. And that really
the person just disappears and you're like,
you don't know how to fix yourself. Yeah.
It fucks you over, right? So I'm like, no, let's keep it good. And also like I'm doing business based out of Toronto. So like it's a small market. So if you're a dick, you're gonna run into that seller again. So it's just not to your benefit. So I told him, he was like, cool, okay, I understand, man. It's a bummer, but like totally get it. Halfway through, his director came on the call. And his director was like very, very surprised that like we were leaving, and he was shocked, and it was like a legitimate emotional breakup reaction. and I was just in my mind I was thinking this, I'm like, okay, but you should have understood where our relationship was and wasn't. Like this shouldn't have been a surprise to you. Like why would you think, you know?
Yeah, did you look in the call notes and see that the last time someone talked to them was like 7 months ago?
Yeah.
So this is where I think George is really bang on with this idea of a relationship health metric, where it's not talking about, you know, time to close. It's not talking about potential runway options. Somewhere in Salesforce or whatever your CRM is, there should be a gauge where you're actually rating where's the health of my relationship with that client. Right? Can I call them up at any time and they'll be happy to hear from me? If I ask them, hey, do you guys want to get together for a drink or for dinner or whatever? Let's talk about new product. Will they actually want to come out? Are they serious? Yeah. Right?
Let's say it really loud, really clear. The health of the deal is not the same thing as the health of the relationship.
100%.
So you got to treat them separately.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think we've all seen the org chart with the yellow, red, green, blue, whatever, kind of like, but what you were saying, I think makes even more sense to think about it this way, which is, okay, how good's the relationship and when's the deal going to close, right? And being able to, like, there's probably some cool correlation you can have to like the deal health and the relationship health. But I say all of that because to your point, it has to be okay. The CRO has to be like, oh, you've got a good relationship. We know this is going to come. It sucks. But almost every time when that deal doesn't close, what do they say? What can we do to make it happen? What do I got to, how can I help? Do you want the CEO to go have a meeting with them? Do you want them to, they're like, what can I throw at this problem that there is no solution?
They're always like, how can we move the deal? It's like, dude, they don't have the money. Like, can you give them the money to then buy it? Because that seems like that's counterproductive. Like,
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting though. It's like I hate that desperation. I hate that thirsty, desperate feeling, man. Like again, I bring it back to like the dating. If you're gonna try to court me, like, would you approach someone that you're trying to court in the same way? Would you be as desperate? Would you be as gross? Like, please, what do I need to do for us to have this date? What do, like seriously, man, what the fuck? Like if
put out on the first date, please.
if we're telling you
what are you gonna say? That's what they're
yeah. But
here's my calendarly.
Look, man, if we tell you guys, or if we're apprehensive, and you know what, this is another thing I do too. When I'm starting an engagement with a technology supplier that I'm potentially interested in, I'll straight up tell them, this is where I'm at. Based on what your numbers are specifically, we can do this in like 2 to 3 quarters. So I lay the ground for like
that's a lot more than most. So
yeah, I was going to say that's.
But if they know what kind of sales cycle I'm envisioning, then they can adjust their expectations, and then there's not as much fucking stress.
Yeah, I mean, because sales teams live and die by the forecast. So if you're giving them the clear forecast, my God, that's a huge win. I mean, I feel sorry for you because anyone who hears this now is going to come.
They're going to come ask you.
Yeah, they're going to be like, I want to sell to this guy because he's going to help my forecast.
Well, look, so I'm going to make it even worse because I'm going to ask you another question because, like, it's fun. I did this like group meet with a bunch of like solopreneurs like myself, and you know, one of the people, a lot of people struggle with getting those leads, and I was like, well, I have an advantage because one, our industry is really small, and I'm not a salesperson. So if I send a CISO an invite on LinkedIn, 90% of the time they're going to accept it without like thinking about it. But if I had an account manager or an AE, you know, profile that says, "Hey, I'm a salesperson," you're probably ignoring it. So that's my question to you, George: is how do you get new relationships with those CISOs?
Well, the way, sorry, go
which
ahead.
George?
Both.
Go ahead, George.
I was gonna say we're out of the virtual era. Okay, so you got to get boots on the ground, right? So one of the common tactics, right, is startup scale is they start hiring territory reps, and then they will go with a BDR firm, right, an inside sales firm. Sometimes they hire inside, but most of the time they go outside to some outsourced firm. There's a problem with that because those people don't move. They're in a bullpen. There's a lot of pressure. They're paid on meetings, so they do all the nonsense that everyone hates.
Yeah.
Also, think about this from a marketing perspective. That's your first contact with that brand. You're calling from who, and you spoofed the area code that I live in. Like, I hate you.
Yes.
So cool.
Blacklisted.
Now all of the marketing that has been invested means like nothing, right? But if you go in that territory sales firm, you got to give them budgets to move around in their territory. And George has said this on our podcast, like, show up in the community. There are ISSA meetings, you know, ISACA, whatever. Like, you don't have to sell at those things, but you got to start showing up and just, I don't want to say press the flesh just to schmooze, but like start being known as a person out there and not just a person trying to pick people's pockets.
And just know that. Oh, sorry.
I think it's Gary Vee. It says it. It's like become a local celebrity, get like locally famous, like in a certain area. Like, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that. It's not the quick strategy because a lot of organizations want to get the fastest path possible to whoever the executive seller is and like want to sell to them right away within the first meeting. That's not how it works. You got to show up to the events and you got to meet the practitioners, and knowing that when you're meeting practitioners, especially if they're not executives, those aren't the people authorizing the purchase, but they are the people that you want as your champions. Because me, CISO, who has a million fucking fires in a day, when I get a seller from that really cool AppSec tool or that really cool NetSec tool or whatever, and it's like, well, do we want to purchase it? I'm going to turn to my team lead who does that and be like, hey, dude, do you like these guys?
Yeah.
And then based on their answer, that's what we go with, right? Because they're the ones like fingers on keyboard doing it. And I'm not going to handcuff them with some shit they didn't want or that they didn't like. Any logical CISO is going to be the same way. So you want to win them over, and then you want to sponsor local community initiatives because that'll get your brand name out there. So you yourself come to the show, meet the people, be a cool dude or gal, and then have your company sponsor some events. So you are now goodwill with the community. You're now considered part of the community. And when you do that, especially like, I'm in the CIO Association in Canada. When we have vendors come and they sponsor events for us, we give them an audience of nothing but CIOs and CISOs, right? So they get what they want. They get that potential chance to sell. Selling the government's like a lot harder as well as it is in America, but at least you're in the room, you're in the door, you're at the table, you know the people, they're talking to you. Then you as a seller, do what you got to do from there. Do your sales magic. I'm not a seller. I don't do this shit. But I just know that we want to get you in front of the people that you want to get in front of. And we want to create an environment where maybe you could show a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of human side, so that you can actually talk about your product to an audience that's captive and wants to listen to you. And I think a lot of sales organizations, not sellers, I don't blame them. I blame the CROs and the higher ups.
Poor training.
When you envision your sellers actually closing deals, what does that conversation look like? Like, I'm talking the room, the environment, the interaction. If you're not visualizing enabling that, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, he brought up like one of my favorite points for startups. It's always in the demo. And this is the dashboard for the CISO, and I'm like, they're not going.
The CISO doesn't look
tool.
at that.
They don't log in. I'm sorry, they're in the compliance meeting. Like George said, he's stuck in audits, or he's in the budget meeting, or whatever. So understand that's part of that anthropology. Understand the operators, and also, yes, you should definitely get to know them and help them because they're not the ones who get invited to steak dinners. Like, they don't go to Black Hat. That's fine, but you should be in that community. I would also say like that model of cold calling, press the flesh, take them out to golf, whatever is left over from this era when sales controlled the conversation. But as somebody who manages a community of like 1,400 CISOs, I would tell you need to behave in a way that you are spoken well of in the rooms that you're not in, right? Every day in the CISO society, people are asking about tooling or by capability, right? Has anyone seen insert name of vendor here? Or we are looking to move off of this runtime security vendor. Does anyone have any recommendations? And I see what people say in terms of how they've been treated. And they will also say like, I thought it was cool, but when my team tested it, it turned out to be like really hit. So they're, as George said, right, they're going to confer with their team. So you really need to think about the whole picture. How is it being used? What is the process? And then like, how are you conducting yourself out in the public? Because they all talk. And I have heard it repeatedly. The credibility and the word of their peers is going to puncture millions of dollars of marketing very quickly, depending on how you treat them.
Yeah, very much. It's like, I know, like a couple, like at the end of the year when I'm kind of planning on, what I need to do for the next year, I try to meet with a bunch of CISOs and say, hey, does this roadmap like align with guys I know and gals I know that will actually be honest with me, and that kind of that comes up a lot, like you said, the I don't know, with the reputation of somebody of what they have and what they do and how important that is. So that's super cool, guys. This is awesome. I could sit here and talk forever, as I'm probably sure you could, but I'll give everybody like where can anybody find you on the interwebs should they want to look for you, and then of course I'll get the details that we'll put down this description too.
Yeah, absolutely. Just we're at Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks on LinkedIn. That's really where we are for all the things, and I'm sure you can find either one of us there too. But if you came to pitch us, know that you may be greeted with a firestorm.
But our show is on Spotify and Apple Pods. Please look us up
everywhere.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys. We'll maybe do this again, I'm sure too.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillClue or visit at willclue.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now, Synac you later.